Hey everybody, welcome to my mono black Pauper deck tech. I absolutely love Pauper as a format. I think it's really just an excellent way for like a person who is considering getting into like MTGO to start playing because the decks are generally like really cheap. Some of the blue decks are a little bit more expensive just because for some reason the demand for Pauper is so high, and like some of the commons that are necessary in those decks are just like, a couple bucks each. I mean that's nothing when you compare it to like standard or especially modern or like even more especially legacy. The Pauper decks are very inexpensive. So without any more ado, I'll get to it. So on the left you'll find our suite of lands. We have five non-basics, including four Baron Moors and one Bojuka Bog. Hitting the graveyard is kind of important, so in this format there are a lot of things that interact with the graveyard. So definitely you want like one effect in the main board. And Baron Moor acts as like just insurance. Like if you flood out, you can always cycle a Baron Moor, grab another, get another look at another card. So I prefer running 23 lands to 22. I like the consistency. I prefer having a slightly heavier land count, especially because we're running things like Disturbed Burial, which has like a pretty high cost if you're using the buyback. Um, so yeah, I guess I'll hop into the cards now. Three Disfigure, you need some early game. Sometimes you just want to disfigure like a Delver on turn one, so it's really important to have some disfigures. You're going to be citing disfigures out a lot, but it's still important to have some early game business. And two, there's a ton of twos in this, and so I'll try and kind of separate them out here. There's three Chainer's Edict. Chainer's Edict is just like a good value card. It's really important against some decks like what do you call it? Like Aura Hexproof. It's good against anything that runs like a small number of like really high powered creatures. Because you can just like run them out of threats with Chainer's Edict. Like even if they're countering a Chainer's Edict, that's not really, it's not like the best value because of course you only spent 2 mana on it, and it can always flash back. Disturbed Burial is like, and it's an excellent value card. So if you've never seen this card before, you can give it a read. The buyback ability, if you basically it means if you pay 5 mana when you cast this spell, if it resolves, you get to put it back into your hand. So like it can still be countered, and then it would go to the graveyard. But if it wasn't countered, if it completed and resolved, then you'd get the creature that you targeted and Disturbed Burial back in your hand. So like in a long game, this card generates a lot of card value, or card advantage, I should say. Kumbaj Witches. Kumbaj Witches are like a weird pinger in mono black. They hit something for one, and then the opponent gets to choose to hit something for one. So it's kind of a weird symmetrical effect, and oftentimes they're going to be hitting your face, but there are ways to recoup life, which we'll get to later. But it's important that this card has 2 black in its casting cost. It's important for especially Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It's also nice having like cheap guys. So Kumbaj Witches, quality card. Guess Verdict, another sacrifice effect that also does incidental damage. Nothing much to say here. It's just like an instant speed sack effect. It's pretty solid. Now, Sign in Blood is excellent. It is a little card advantage engine that you run. It also acts sometimes as a burn spell. Like if the opponent's at 2 or 1 life, you can just cast Sign in Blood targeting them, and they'll lose. Even though they'll draw cards, the game's over. That's fine. It's an excellent card. And then Victim of Night, yet another way to kill creatures. The double black casting cost is fine because we're in a mono black deck, so it's all good. Phyrexian Rager, yet another card advantage card. It draws you 1 card and you lose 1 life as it enters the battlefield. Costs 3. Just solid value for Pauper. Like you're gonna have, if you start playing Pauper, you're gonna have to get used to creatures that are a little weaker than you might otherwise you know, it's not a Tarmogoyf. You're not finding any Tarmogoyfs in this format. There are 2 mana 4/4s, but you know you're not going to get a 2 mana 6/7. Phyrexian Rager is a solid value creature. Trades for a lot of the creatures in the format, and it's just nice. Also, pretty nice to bounce or rebuy with Disturbed Burial or Ninjutsu with Okiba Gang Shinobi. So it's just a solid value card. Chittering Rats. Now this card is I don't know if it's like essential, but it provides so much value. Let's say the opponent's like stuck on lands. You play a Chittering Rats. It's basically a time walk. You are making them put a card from their hand on top of their library. So it's basically like delaying their draw for a turn. It's just very powerful. It's a creature that can be, rebought with Disturbed Burial and also bounced with Okiba Gang Shinobi. So it's just a very powerful effect on a decent dude, 2/2 or 3. And then Oubliette. Oubliette is, there's a lot of text on this card, but basically it's like an Oblivion Ring for a creature. The problem is it also exiles auras that are attached to it, and then once Oubliette is like destroyed or something, that creature comes back into play with all auras that were attached to it when Oubliette was cast. So keep that in mind when using this, but basically it's just like an O-ring for a creature. If Oubliette dies, the creature comes back into play. It's also nice because it provides 2 black casting costs for Grey Merchant of Asphodel, so worth keeping in mind there. Tendrils of Corruption, nice little life gain thing. Also kills a creature usually. It deals X damage, where X is the number of swamps you have, and then you gain that much life. So it's just a solid card, good against aggressive decks. Yeah. And then Grey Merchant of Asphodel. This uses the Devotion mechanic, so basically for every black mana symbol that you control on the battlefield, so let's say you have an Oubliette in play and a Chittering Rats in play, and then you play Grey Merchant of Asphodel. If that resolves with all those things in play, you drain the opponent for 6 life. That means you deal 6 damage of life loss to them, and you gain 6 life. So it's a very powerful effect, and there, this is basically your finisher a lot of the time. It's a strong card. 2/4 blocks a lot, and it costs 5 mana, so it's a good card. And then Okiba Gang Shinobi is it's kind of a weird one of here. It's 5 mana. It costs 3 black, but its alternative cost is Ninjutsu 4, 3 and a black. And what that means is if you attack with a creature and it's not blocked, you can pay 4 mana, return that creature to your hand, and put Okiba Gang Shinobi in place of that creature tapped and attacking. And Okiba Gang Shinobi is good because it has this effect. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. So it can really just, it can completely knock out some opponents. Like some people just cannot afford to discard 2 cards. And if they don't block one of your dudes, sometimes it's right to like sacrifice, throw a creature away, like, attack with 2 guys even though one's going to die, so you can Okiba Gang Shinobi and bounce one of them and make them discard 2 cards. So it's a nice little trick that we keep up our sleeve, against certain opponents. It's very good. It goes nicely with our other discard suite in the sideboard. You can see Duress and Wrench Mind. All right. So, excuse me, last card in the library is Gurmag Angler. Gurmag Angler is simply just a big dude that you can cast for less than 7 mana most of the time. You're going to be like using cards, Guess Verdict, Sign in Blood, whatever. As you cast spells and, use Baron Moors, it gets less expensive. So you can usually cast Gurmag Angler for like 1 to 4 mana. So it's a great card. And in the sideboard, let's take a look. So Duress is good. It's, just kind of a nice semi-Thoughtseize effect in the format. There are a lot of non-creature spells, non-creature, non-land cards. So it's nice to have the flexibility to take any one of those. It just costs 1 mana. It's a good way to interact with opponents against which like Disfigure is bad against. So Duress is pretty strong there. I have a second copy of Disturbed Burial for those really, really grindy matchups. Sometimes you want to. Wrench Mind. Target player discards 2 cards unless they discard an artifact card. So this is an excellent card. Obviously, you don't bring it against like affinity decks, but against the combo decks, then you certainly want to bring in Wrench of Mind. Any control and combo decks, you want to make sure their hand is as limited as possible, so that you can kind of control the flow of the game. Choking Sands. Now there are a lot of Tron decks in the format. A lot of decks that use like big mana, and that usually involves Tron, Urza Tron, which I've done a modern Tron deck tech, but not in Pauper yet. But Choking Sands is a great way to pressure their life total and keep them off of their Tron combo. So it's important to run a bunch of these so you can consistently hit Choking Sands when you're against a Tron opponent. Pestilence. Pestilence is a sweeper. Now, I've been kind of waffling between things like Shrivel and Pestilence, because Pestilence, it can take out big guys. It can take out big creatures, but it's not, I mean, it's slow. It costs 4 mana, and then on top of that, you're going to have to be like pushing in 1 mana for every 1 damage you want to do to all things in the game. So Pestilence can be a bit of a bear. You know, its effect is very strong, but it's not always consistent, because you're not always going to have a ton of mana to use it. But Shrivel only like it only does -1/-1 to all creatures, so it can be a little bit too limited. You know, Pestilence is a good card, but yeah, it really just depends on the situation. Sometimes Pestilence is significantly better than Shrivel. Sometimes Shrivel is better. But I'm playing Pestilence. I think it's great. It also contributes to Devotion, Grey Merchant. Yeah, so that's I guess the reason why I run Pestilence over Shrivel. I think it's just a bit more powerful, even though it's a little less consistent. And then one more Oubliette in the sideboard. I don't know, bringing it in against like affinity decks, where Disfigure is pretty weak. And then 2 Relic of Progenitus, which exiles cards from both players' graveyards when you sacrifice it, or just you can tap it to exile a card from the graveyard. So just another way to control the graveyard there. So we'll join a Pauper league here in just a second, and I hope to see you guys for round 1. Thank you so much.